For hours today, there was an eerie silence in this place as Downing Street was asked again and again if Boris Johnson condemned comments reportedly made by a new advisor.
But the problem's not just recruitment.
This is Andrew Sabisky. He'd been appointed by the PM's chief advisor Dominic Cummings, who put out a job advert specifically calling for weirdos and misfits. Tonight, that short-lived appointment came to an end as Sabisky left his role, saying he didn't want to become a distraction after accusations of racism. Cummings' new hire appeared to have been an avid reader of Mr. Cummings' blog. In 2014, a man called Andrew Sabisky commented, "There are excellent reasons to think the very real racial differences in intelligence are significantly, even mostly, genetic in origin." And in the same year, he also said, one way to get around the problems of unplanned pregnancies creating a permanent underclass would be to legally enforce universal uptake of long-term contraception at the onset of puberty. Tonight, other comments have emerged, authored once again by Andrew Sabisky, such as one that appeared to attribute ethnic diversity to the death of white Americans. John McTernan was head of political operations under Tony Blair.
The thing about that strand of far-right neo-libertarian thinking, which is eugenicist and racist, is that is outside the bounds of what you should probably be able to say within government. You can think it, you can say it outside government. Being inside government, racism is a red line, and I think that's a problem.
Radical change in government. Mr. Cummings hasn't been shy in saying that's his aim, to move fast and break things. He also wants a wide range of views for advisors to think the unthinkable. But as he's found out with this hire, that can sound better in theory than in practice.
Advisors add expertise, and that expertise can be being a contrarian, but it's not that you're recruiting people for a view. You're recruiting them to be part of a team in Number 10 that support the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's agenda. You're not there to change the current agenda. You're there to implement it better.
Tonight, Newsnight spoke to Andrew Sabisky, who said he didn't want to comment further. Dominic Cummings wants weirdos and misfits in Number 10. He's learned today that recruitment policy can have its dangers.
That was James Clayton. We're joined now by the former Vote Leave board member and co-editor of The Critic, Christopher Montgomery, and Polly Mackenzie, who's the chair of Demos and worked for Nick Clegg in Number 10. Should we talk about his departure first or his arrival, Polly? What is the more shocking?
I think it's disappointing in a way that Dominic Cummings, who wrote this letter inviting diverse groups of people to apply, people who wouldn't normally be considered for a role in Downing Street, apparently got 35,000 responses, and the person he chooses to hire is in fact someone very much in his own image, somebody who was already in the Dominic Cummings ecosystem, somebody commenting on his blogs and sharing all of his opinions. It doesn't really speak to this idea of diversity at all. And then, of course, it's clear that both the values he uses to make judgments around race and around gender are, in my view, reprehensible, but I think at least questionable. And who's also, if he's supposedly recruited to be the bright star of intellect, it's also disappointing that he is, in many ways, wrong on the facts and the science. So I don't really see what he had to offer.
If you were being generous, and you call it reprehensible, and many people will agree with you, he said that stuff has been taken out of context. Do you have any sympathy with a sort of post-university kid of 21 writing stuff on a blog that was experimental that has now come back to haunt him in a first senior job?
I've got lots of sympathy for that. And of course, some of the remarks remind me a little, they're obviously a very different kind of person, of the ways in which Roger Scruton's comments were taken out of context in a newspaper article. That sort of sense that he's saying one thing that you could do as a sort of philosophical point is to have forced sterilisation isn't quite the same thing as actually advocating for it. However, when you look deeply into some of his other comments, the idea that you would be comfortable stating that black people as a group have a 15-point lower IQ than white people as a group suggests to me that you are both wrong on facts and also wrong on values.
Chris, many people would say this shouldn't be about him. This is much more about Dominic Cummings and indeed about Boris Johnson, where the buck stops.
Well, you asked, should we start with how he went into Number 10 or how he left Number 10? I think we should start with how he left. If I was a weirdo, and I am a weirdo, I would be feeling very disgruntled this evening because the 35,000 people answered this email. And what are they hoping of this number 10? That they'll have some degree of security of tenure, yet one of their number has been bounced.
I think that was never promised.
Well, they were bounced out the door with this one after 2 days of pressure from some of our leading websites. So if I was a widow in number 10 at the moment, I would be looking to contract somewhere else at the moment. I wouldn't have much faith in this system delivering anything more than skin-deep optics in terms of intellectual diversity.
So let me understand that. Are you saying that he should have been kept on?
Oh, absolutely not. He should never have been hired in the first place. But that's what happens when you've got gimcrack recruitment procedures of the sort that we used.
Who do you think fired who, or who walked?
I'm sure he was pushed on. I mean, Boris is in charge of number 10. This briefing that you get that, Dom had to be overruled by somebody. Well, of course he had to be overruled by somebody. He's not in charge. The Prime Minister's in charge.
But Dominic Cummings wouldn't have hired the person that he had brought in, presumably.
But that's the point I'm making. Dom's not in charge of these decisions. Boris is in charge of these decisions. Somebody's only in number 10 if the Prime Minister says they're in number 10.
So you're saying he was almost certainly fired by Boris Johnson?
I'm sure he was fired by Boris Johnson.
I think Chris makes an important point, though, about the recruitment process and this sense, because you're right, Emily, it said specifically in the advert that some of you will only last a few weeks and then I'll turf you out. And again, the idea that what you want in number 10 is people who are either financially or otherwise secure enough to cope with living in permanent jeopardy of their job.
And again, loneliness, I think, as well.
Loneliness.
Without part.
He's somebody who schedules meetings at 7 p.m. on a Friday night, seemingly purposely to sabotage people's social lives. And that doesn't mean that you can have a diverse...
He just does that so he can tell a story to journalists.
Well, still,
I blame the journalists for repeating that very silly story.
But the people who have to attend the 7 o'clock meeting on a Friday night are affected by that.
Show.
And
it's a dumb show.
But it affects your ability to get a diverse group of people into Downing Street, which is something we have always struggled with.
So basically, the ultimate insider hired another ultimate insider. There was nothing weirdo and misfit about that at all.
They are a bit weird, right?
They're definitely flaky.
They're not the sort of Jeremy Haywood type establishment.
But Polly thinks he hired somebody entirely in his own image who had actually commented on his own blogs. It's not exactly reaching out. It may well be all white men look the same to Polly. I don't know. He definitely wasn't in Dom's image. Dom is somebody who's only ever really done political jobs, working for the Tory party, working for central government. This guy had done none of that. He hadn't worked for the Tory party, had never had a spadship. So, no, this was a definite outsider. OK, well, do you take John McTernan's view on, then, that expertise is meant to be contrarian? Now, individual views, when you break them down about forced sterilisation or contraception or about eugenics, all sound pretty horrific. But do you accept an idea of the importance of having somebody who's not scared to say the things that everyone else is?
Absolutely. You want to disrupt groupthink. You want to disrupt groupthink in number 10 more than anywhere else. That was why I made the point about not having any security of tenure. If you're a young disruptor who's answered the email and is in number 10 at the moment, you're going to be thinking, good grief, how long am I going to be in here?
So nobody's going to say anything at all?
Why would they? They're not going to stay if they do.
And is that a good thing or a bad thing, Polly?
You do need disruptive thinkers. You need people to challenge. And, Boris Johnson, I think, rightly said, the Treasury probably would have blocked the M25. And being able to challenge, that's something that political advisors and experts can offer. The problem is we also need expertise for things like floods. And we see the country struggling to get a grip of massive infrastructure projects.
But you can say that's somebody else's. That's somebody else's job.
Yes, and it's a pretense to think you need a flood expert in number 10. I mean, that would just be a waste of space in number 10.
I think
you absolutely do not need somebody who knows how to build a levee in number 10. It's childish.
Not how to build a levee, but I think the key thing is challenging potential groupthink at the Environment Agency,
but not with your spades and your sandbags. It would be pointless to have an expert of that sort in number 10.
You're minimising the importance of challenging thinking around efforts like rewilding and changing the way we manage our uplands, which are important because we have routinely gone for a very conventional
Polly, let me
model
just broaden this out, because Nick raised a point, which was over the last week, we've seen a Dominic Cummings win, a Dominic Cummings lose, and this which looks like another lose.
Well, the key thing there is you've presented it as that. Dom isn't taking any of these decisions. Boris is taking these decisions. If you keep refracting this through the lens of Dom did this, Dom didn't do that, of course, it's teleology. You'll get to that sort of story. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
OK, so my point is, do you think the tenure of Dominic Cummings tonight, however you want to see it or however we should be talking about it, is less or more secure?
It doesn't matter. He's just a creature of the Prime Minister. He doesn't have any agency other than that which Boris gives him.
Do you believe that?
In theory, that's the case, but Boris Johnson isn't a details man. The question is, how far will Dominic Cummings push things? If he causes Boris more political pain than he wants, then it's perfectly possible that he will be ousted. And I think, given that Boris's strategy is to reach this new coalition of voters that he has, who, with a strategy which is basically, Blairism plus Brexit, strong on crime, soft on the NHS, lots more public spending, rebalance the North.
Tony Blair's
this is
term,
all of this is a huge distraction from Boris reaching the voters.
Briefly,
that he wants.
would you accept that it was the 32 times question that sort of ended things today?
Well, that's a great mystery. So this number 10 has made a great fuss of, we're not interested in what the press think, don't go on the Today programme, nobody in Newsnight, whatever else they're doing. Yet 2 days of, as far as I can see from the outside, minimal pressure, and they've bounced this one out the door. So
you think it was media pressure that did it?
One has to wonder why they did it, unless there's something else coming. I think he shouldn't have been hired in the first place.
Well,
but if he was hired in the first place, I don't see why they haven't stuck with their man.
But it's possible that he was hired by Dominic Cummings, and when it attracted political opprobrium, Boris Johnson got involved.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
On that note, thank you both very much indeed.